All right, so I'm going to get started. Just if people file in, that's fine. We can just take a seat. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second Housing Production Plan Community Housing Forum. I am Fiona Coughlin, Town Planner. Thank you all very much for being here this evening. This is our final engagement forum before we submit our Housing Production Plan to the state. At the moment, we are tentatively having that meeting as a joint Planning Board and Select Board meeting on the 21st of November. So this engagement session is really critical to get your feedback on the plan, the strategies, goals, and priorities for the town, because it'll dictate how the town addresses affordable housing for the next 5 years. And once the feedback that we received this evening is incorporated, as I mentioned, we will be having a joint meeting and then sending it off to the state for approval. I don't want to drone on too long and take Karen's time away from her. So Karen Sonnenberg is here from, she has her own consulting firm. She has done the housing production plans for the town for the past 4. This will be the 4th. So she's very familiar with Grafton, and she's been a wonderful consultant to work with, and she's going to lead the presentation. And we just ask at this time if you could hold your questions and comments until the end, because it's likely that any questions that you might have will probably be answered throughout the course of the presentation, and then we will discuss later. So, alrighty, thank you all again, and I will turn over to Karen.
All right. Thanks, Fiona, and thanks everybody for being here tonight. Appreciate it. I'm going to try to get through this presentation expeditiously so we can really have a conversation, hear from you on your questions and comments. That will be important feedback to us when we finalize the plan. So I am going to go through the key takeaways of the draft housing production plan. We're going to talk a little bit about, why we're doing this and identifying priority local needs and really focusing on package of strategies that are included in the plan to address those needs. As to why we're doing a plan, we have just some bullets here. One is to update prior housing production plans, and they were done in 2006, 2013, and 2018, the latest of which is expiring because they're 5-year plans. It was time to, even within the last 5 years, a lot of things have happened that have created significant changes to housing conditions, including COVID, for example. So being able to revisit demographic and economic housing trends and characteristics is a real opportunity to rethink what the context of the needs in town, and then to better understand the current market dynamic, to identify strategies to address the identified needs and goals in the plan, and to create a roadmap for housing initiatives over the next 5 years, and gain access to what's called safe harbor provisions. Technically, it's called certifications. So if the town reaches its annual housing production goals, it can get a safe harbor where it does not have to approve comprehensive Chapter 40B applications that it deems do not address local housing needs, without the developer's ability to appeal that decision. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So what are housing production plans? You might hear, some of you are well acquainted, some might hear about Chapter 40B. Chapter 40B means that a developer proposes a project that meets certain requirements. It can override local zoning. And a lot of towns do not like when developers override their zoning. However, 40B can be a very good permitting tool. Instead of having to do spot zoning, when a project comes where you do need waivers of zoning, you have the flexibility of being able to permit that project and get some affordable housing and other benefits as well. So the whole idea for housing production was to give greater local control over housing production at the local level with respect as a subset of 40B regulations. These plans require state approval, require approval of the planning board and the select board, and then state approval. There are annual housing production goals, and they're the equivalent of 0.5% of the town's year-round housing stock. And that year-round figure comes from the 2020 census information now. Each decennial census will update that figure. For Grafton, that annual goal is 39 units. If the town prepares a plan, it gets state approval based on, the requirements that's under housing production, then produces 39 units, it gets the safe harbor or certification where it can deny what it considers inappropriate comprehensive permit applications for a year. If it actually produces 1% of its year-round housing stock, which would be 77 units, it gets a 2-year safe harbor. There are no 3 or 4 safe harbor periods, but 1 or 2 can be very helpful. And then it identifies strategies to address needs and goals. Oh, here we go, safe harbor, right? So there are various definitions of affordable housing. This is kind of affordable housing 101. The HUD basically says that if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs, whether for ownership or for rental, you're paying too much. And the state has kind of embraced this 30% level threshold as well. When we're talking about housing production plans, we're typically talking about the Chapter 40B definition, which means if a unit's going to be counted towards annual housing production goals, like 39 units, or towards the 10% affordability threshold under 40B, it has to meet a number of requirements. It has to be, for example, subsidized, either directly by a local, regional, some public entity, or it has to be approved by a subsidizing agency. Once again, kind of going back to the Chapter 40B, if the developer wants to submit a Chapter 40B application to the locality, it has to first go through a subsidizing agency to get the go-ahead. So either through a subsidizing agency or actually directly subsidized through some public entity is a requirement under 40B. It has to be deed restricted, and we're talking more and more about deed restricting, requiring affordability in perpetuity. It has to be affirmatively marketed. So those people outside the community have an opportunity to learn about an affordable housing unit becoming available and the opportunity to apply. Although up to 70% of the units in a new development can be reserved for those who live or work in the community or have children attending local schools, and that's referred to as local preference. And it has to be available to households earning at or below 80% of area median income, and we're talking about the area being Worcester County for Grafton. I'll give you an example. A household of 3, the income limit is I think it's $84,250. We're talking about working people, and it goes up. It's adjusted by household size and is adjusted annually. Last year it was $79,600. And then going back to, what units are included in the subsidized housing inventory for Grafton, those units that meet all the affordability requirements towards that 10% affordability goal under 40B. The census identified 7,740 year-round units, and at this point, 428 are eligible for inclusion under the SHI, and that's the equivalent of 5.53% of the town's year-round housing stock. So that town is more than halfway towards meeting that 10% affordability goal. So the housing needs assessment is pretty detailed and comprehensive. The first housing summit, we spent a lot more time going through the analysis of the demographic, economic, and housing information. Just kind of as a snapshot, the major findings included the population is continuing to grow. You can't read the numbers. You see the chart from 1960 to 2021 basically going up. And between 2010 and 2020, Grafton saw 2,000 additional residents. And the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission predicts that by 2030, that population will continue to grow from 19,664 residents in 2020 to almost 21,000 residents. So their predictions are that the town will continue to grow. Looking at age distribution, some proportional losses of children, but major increases in middle-aged residents and older residents. Certainly older residents, the baby boomers have really fueled that, not just at Grafton, but as across the country, and certainly in the region and the state. Maybe some of the increase in middle-aged residents comes from people who are moving into the community looking for, maybe from the eastern part of the state or southern part of the state, looking for more affordable living conditions and have the incomes to be able to afford the rising housing prices. And then there certainly recognized income disparities in the economic data. The median household income continues to increase. The 2021 census estimates suggest that it was $107,237, and just to give you a comparison, countywide it was about $84,952. So, well, much higher than even the county. However, 10.5% of households earn less than $25,000, and that's up from 9.3% in 2010. On the other end of the income range, however, those earning $150,000 or more increased from 24% in 2010 to 34% in 2021. And there have been increases in poverty in the last decade, from 6.5% to 7.3% of all residents. And what's concerning is that the poverty level for seniors has grown even more markedly, from 5.9% to 14.2% for those 65 years of age and older. The median income of renters was $52,212, significantly higher, not surprisingly. For homeowners, median of $132,095. What we see is it's become harder, some erosion of the middle class in the community, often referred to as the missing middle. So people whose incomes are higher than who would be eligible for affordable housing, higher than at 80% of area median income, but still priced out of the housing market. From the state's Department of Labor and Workforce Development, they list Grafton's average weekly wage at $1,244. If you look at that on an annual basis, that would be the equivalent of about $65,000, which is 61% of the median household income for residents, meaning that a lot of people who have jobs in town probably can't afford to live in town. And 10.5% of residents claim some type of disability. And that is likely to increase over the coming years because of the aging and the baby boomers. So looking at housing costs, in 2022, the median single-family house price was $537,500, which would require an income of about $149,000. I just checked, and the median single-family home price as of September 2023 increased to $601,250. Prices just keep going up. And by the way, just to give you an idea, the calculations regarding estimated income is based on spending 30% of income on housing costs, 6.5% interest rate. At 30-year term, we plugged in the property taxes, and we were talking about 80% financing. So one would still have to come up with a 20% down payment plus the closing costs. Condo prices are increasing too. So as the end of 2022, the median condo price was $370,000, which required an income of about $112,500. As of September 23, that median's gone up to $410,000. And rents are high too. So a typical two-bedroom unit, about $1,500, and that would require an income of about $70,000, which is significantly higher than the median renter household income of $52,212. And once again, we're looking at calculations based on spending 30% of income on housing costs, and in this case, we plugged in a $250 per month utility allowance. So we're talking about rising affordability gaps. So the gap is, or was, $142,500 for the median household income earning resident, based on the difference between the median house price of, in 2022, $537,500, and what a median income earning household can afford, or $395,000. So the gap increases to over $215,000 if you are working off of the updated median single-family house price of over $601,000. If you're going to look at the 80% of area median income earning household, taking a household size of 3, which is equivalent of about 79,600 last year, the difference, or the affordability gap, widens to $278,500, which is the difference between the median single-family house price and what a household at this income can afford, $259,000. So if you're looking at, once again, the increase in median single-family house price, the gap widens to $351,000. Also, it's not surprising with rising housing prices that more people are spending too much of their income on housing. And we, once again, define that as spending more than 30% of income. So 24%, almost a quarter of all households, had what's called cost burdens because they were overspending on their housing. 9% were spending more than half their income on housing costs, what we refer to as having severe cost burdens. And those levels increase to 58% with cost burdens and 28% with severe cost burdens if you're looking at households earning at or below 80% of area median income. And if you're looking at just the households that have cost burdens, the analysis shows a deficit of about 1,700 units based on those who are earning at or below 80% of area median income that have cost burdens. So just this chart just tracks median income. The lowest bar is 80% of area median income, then it's median income, and then we're looking at house prices, and you see the widening affordability gap. If we take that $495,000 median as of 2021, we plug in the 2023 figure of 601,000, you see another steep climb in that line, and the gap obviously widens. So bringing all these trends together, you come up with a scenario of what's happening within the dynamic of the housing market. This is not just Grafton, this is happening on a regional basis. But it shows the context in which we need to try to address our strategies. So we talked about the migration of new residents with higher incomes who can avoid the rising housing prices coming into the community. Increasing demand, kind of limited supply, drives up prices. Economics 101, rising prices attract developers, and that's certainly been the case in Grafton. Widening affordability gaps, increasing cost burdens happen. Land values, which are kind of the real pivotal piece in market demand. Plus, in addition to restrictive zoning, larger lot zoning in many areas, makes that high-priced single-family home development the highest and best use for developers. So you need regulatory relief plus subsidies in order to increase housing affordability and diversity, to increase housing choices in the community. And I should say, I think that the town's efforts in doing mixed-use village center overlay districts to try to promote mixed-use development and multifamily housing in appropriate locations has been a very kind of critical component in the planning process. Greater housing diversity relies on density and economies of scale. Subsidies are competitive and limited. As we mentioned before, there's rising interest rates and construction costs only make a bad situation worse. Requiring more subsidies. Lower income residents, including many long-term residents, are struggling to remain in the community. Older residents on fixed income remain in their homes with little opportunity to downsize in Grafton. And starter housing is really no longer becoming available without subsidies. So this housing production plan recommends a continued focus on rental housing development to deal with the housing needs of families as well as seniors, to focus on the ability to focus on more vulnerable residents, because almost all state subsidies are for rental housing. So if you're going to get at kind of lower income people, the affordability gap in order to subsidize the development costs is you need kind of multiple layers of financing. Rental housing helps diversify the housing stock. Long waits for subsidized housing in the community are a real problem. But we also recognize that the town's housing agenda is to include some first-time home ownership opportunities for starter housing as well as units for empty nesters. The plan also suggests that a priority need should be to deal with handicap accessibility as support services, integrate those into new development, to deal with the special needs population as well as will be a growing number of seniors. And need resources for improving housing conditions for qualifying households as well, as a good segment of the town's housing stock is older. So getting to housing strategies. Now these strategies were informed by a variety of sources, including previous plans, the housing summit that we had in June, interviews, housing trust meetings, as well as some of the early goings from the master plan process. So timing on this is good input into the master planning process, and we've been able to take advantage of some of the early responses from the community on housing as well. So the first category of strategies includes housing production and preservation strategies. First one, to foster the development of town-owned properties. This is a required strategy to be included in all housing production plans. And a good example of what we include in the plan is 25 Worcester Street, which is the conversion of the old high school into housing for seniors. The project, the recommendation is to continue to provide support to make sure that development happens. Particularly useful because the development focuses not only seniors, but those seniors earning at or below 60% of area median income, which we know from the data are those that are most in need, including some earning at or below 30% of area median income. So it's a really meaningful project for the town, and it's one where the town has really helped establish some of the terms and conditions for the development. But there may be other opportunities as well. We include some of those in the plan. Also, to partner with developers on privately owned properties with affordable units. And the plan includes from the results from the housing summit that we had on the types of housing people would like to see, as well as potential locations for the housing. And we really emphasize the need to have the Affordable Housing Trust engaged early in the conceptual phases of any development with affordable housing, having their review. Currently, the Housing Trust reviews any 40B development, but we're suggesting that that be extended to include any development that includes affordable units, to get the Housing Trust early guidance and review of those developments. And to pursue mixed-use and transit-oriented development. As I mentioned, the town's been very proactive in zoning for overlay districts, and that includes also the recent approval of MBTA community zoning for multifamily housing. So moving those projects along be helpful. Sports scattered site infill development. This suggests, that within existing communities there are opportunities to integrate smaller scale housing types at a reasonable scale to serve that missing middle, to serve housing types that might be more amenable to addressing specific housing needs, as well as households earning along an income continuum. introduce and promote housing rehab initiatives. The plan suggests that the town look into applying for community development block grant funding to fund a housing rehab loan program for qualifying homeowners to make important updates to their properties, bring them up to health and safety codes, as well as they potentially introducing a small repair grant program, which has been done by a number of communities, offering small grants of up to $5,000 for qualifying households to make important, once again, health and safety repairs to their homes. And then there's a list of other resources that are either provided by the state or in the region that would be helpful to promote within the community. And implement a rental assistance program. The town has allocated $10,000 in CPA funding to the Grafton Housing Authority to help some existing tenants or new tenants with rent to basically stabilize those households on a one-off type of basis. Also, we include 4 zoning strategies, and I should mention that the state's Housing Choice Initiative basically says, designates that zoning amendments or bylaws that boost housing production can be approved, have to be approved by a simple majority as opposed to a supermajority. I mean, zoning can be complicated and often kind of challenging to get approvals on that supermajority piece, but this will make it a little easier to get important zoning changes made. Second one is to implement ADU bylaw. The Grafton currently has an ADU bylaw in place, but since 1988, only 72 special permits have been offered or issued for ADUs, and mostly for family occupancy. So over time, if families moved out, theoretically, those units would be basically revert back to single-family status only, and those ADUs would be lost. The plan recommends that the town look at a number of model bylaws, consider by right permitting, find ways to make it easier for residents to create ADUs. The plan acknowledges that ADUs are unlikely to add to the SHI, but they serve a number of purposes, both to benefit the homeowners, new tenants, as well as the community, and should be encouraged. The recent proposed housing bond bill basically will make by right ADUs a requirement across all communities in the state. So, and it should add, also, if passed, provide huge amount of new resources to communities, $4 billion. So, and that would be a real important boon to places all across the Commonwealth. Amend the flexible development bylaw, which allows the clustering of housing and the preservation of open space. A really good policy for development instead of the typical, subdivision, kind of anti-sprawl zoning. But the current bylaw has not been very effective, and it should be revisited to figure out ways to better promote affordable housing and potentially make other tweaks that would make it more effective and user-friendly. So that's another recommendation. And allow affordable housing on non-compliant lots under certain conditions. This, once again, gets at this kind of scattered site development, missing middle, how to find opportunities within existing communities to put in a group home or a pocket neighborhood with a cluster of small bungalow units for starter housing or downsizing, or other types of housing that basically is a kind of single-family scale, but will provide some greater housing diversity, housing choice. Outreach and operating strategies, these two are pretty fundamental. One is to continue to conduct outreach and advocacy for affordable housing initiatives, and there are a number of recommendations included in the plan, and to continue to capitalize the housing trust so that it can respond to development opportunities as they arise. And there's some suggestions on that. Just going back to the housing bond bill, one of the provisions is to allow communities to raise transfer tax on high-end property sales that would go directly into housing trust funds. So the discretion to go between 0.5% to 2% of sales above $1 million, for example, could be a real boost to the housing trust fund. And then, just on next steps, based on comments, we'll revise the draft HPP. We're having a joint meeting of the select board and the planning board in November, later in November, to review the draft and hopefully at some point soon after approve the draft so we can submit it to the state. The state technically has 90 days to review and approve the plan, but it's, now they're really expediting the review process, and it's now happening a month, so that's been a very good sign. So that's a lot of information in a short period of time. But in any case, anybody kind of open up for questions and comments and also, I mean, members of the Housing Trust, staff, anybody else has comments as we move along, we should all just have a dialogue here. Okay.
Yeah, just for definition of affordability, I know you put the 80% markets. Is there a review of that going on in terms of how that should be looked at? Is affordability relative? I think with regards to housing, especially when you have houses that are going for $600,000, on average. So how do we look at it from a town perspective in terms of affordability?
From a town perspective?
Yeah, people from their perspective. If I have a son that's, high school teacher that makes $50,000 a year,
Yeah.
he can't afford a living room.
Right. Right.
You have an elderly parent that has got to downsize and live somewhere smaller, what have you, there's no units available
Right.
for that. So, and also affordability with regards to that as well.
Yep. Yep. It's a problem. There's just not enough subsidized units to go around at all. And, even some of the affordable housing units, it's a question whether they're really affordable. With rents approaching $2,000 an affordable unit. One example is that for potential 40B applications down the road, instead of having the units at 80% of area median income level, 25% at 80%, really push the developer to do 20% of the units at 50% of area median income, so you get some lower rents. The other invaluable thing is, the Section 8 housing choice vouchers. And if they have a new project, like hopefully the proposed 25 Worcester Street, integrating units that are directed to those earning out of below 30% of area median income funds really provides some relief. I do think that accessory dwelling units can be helpful, because if you have an older person living in a house and spending far too much of income on housing, if they can have an ADU, they get some income from that ADU, and you get also a moderately priced rental unit for a smaller household. So there's ways of, I think, working on different housing types and subsidies to make things better. But it's still a huge challenge. Yeah.
So, got a couple comments on two topics,
Mhm.
housing diversity and zoning challenges. Housing diversity, in the housing production plan, it points out that from 2010 to 2021, the increase in the households was kind of split between ownership and rental, owner-occupied and renter-occupied. Out of 576, this is from the report from the census, as I understand it, 576 new households, 174 owner-occupied, 402 renter-occupied, which is described as diversity. But you have to look at this in the context of the number of new housing units that have been added. And I get this from the assessor data. I was just reading it, updating that the other day. In that same time period, from 2010 to 2021, we added, according to the assessor's record, 575 housing units. 420 of them are single-family detached, 123 are condos, 32 are multifamily, two families or apartments. So the number of units added was almost entirely units that are typically thought of as owner-occupied, but the statistics show that in fact a lot of those single families and condos have become renter-occupied where they might have been owner-occupied. So we don't know how many of the new units versus existing units. So that's but it's the mix of that is interesting. So in terms of what I think of as housing diversity, which is different types of housing, single family,
Right.
condo, apartments, duplexes,
Right.
three families, we have not increased the diversity one bit in that same time period. So that is, in recent years, we really haven't changed the diversity of housing types. Going forward, however, we're seeing quite a different pattern. There are quite a number of new housing developments, mostly apartments now, and a lot of those are listed in the housing production plan.
Right.
That is more of a real increase in the diversity of housing types. So
Yes,
while
mostly
what
rentals.
we've seen over the last 10 years, no real improvement in diversity of housing types. What it looks like we're going to be seeing over the next 5 years is a substantial increase in diversity of housing types.
Yes.
So that's a plus. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit of my quibble with the way the last 10 years have been described, but looking forward, yeah, we're seeing a change in the pattern from the last 20 plus years of developing nothing but single family homes and condos. So that's my comment. And that's
You know,
just an
send me the
observation on
assessor's
diversity.
data, because when I reviewed assessor's data, what happens is that they look at properties. They don't look at units, so it's,
Yes.
you can get the number of properties, but it's hard to get the actual number of units. So send me that information, we'll add it.
Yes, I derive the number of units from the assessor's data. In some cases, had to fill it in because it's not all there,
Okay,
but yes, I develop unit counts.
good.
So, but that's interesting. But yeah, diversity is kind of a tough. There's different ways of looking at it too. But I think the good news for us is that we see a significant increase in diversity of housing just now coming into the picture.
Yeah, you know, I think that when we talk about diversity in the housing plan, we're talking about different housing types beyond the single-family detached house.
That's the way I look at it too.
Yes,
Yeah, so on to zoning challenges.
yeah,
So there's a couple of things. One thing that the housing production plan, has a paragraph in there describing the multifamily zoning, Grafton's current residential RMF zoning, and it mentions a couple of things that are significant challenges but aren't really highlighted as such, namely the requirement for a special permit, that's a barrier, the limit on density. It's, in the RMF zone, you're limited to less than 8 units per acre density, which is...
the RMF,
That's the RMF zoning, but, right.
okay.
Right. that's the residential multifamily zone, which is not to be confused with the village mixed use or the 40R zones, which are a whole different story. I'm looking at the RMF here.
Okay.
The other challenge that I would point out with respect to RMF is that RMF zoning is approximately 3% of the land area in town. The total of 390 acres that is zoned for residential multifamily right now, and of that, all but 34 acres have already been developed or are undevelopable. So we have exactly 2 parcels
All but
available
what?
for the-
Go back and say that, I want to get that down. All but what? All but 2, what?
34 acres.
All but 34 acres are already built?
So, yeah. There are only 34 acres of RMF zoning that are currently available for development. The rest of it is either already developed or is precluded from development by means of it being permanently protected conservation land or other ways of, or there's one like a 1 acre parcel there that is not yet developed.
Okay.
Yeah, for all practical purposes, we have a 28 acre parcel of RMF on Providence Road, which is now has a development under review by the planning board, so that is in the process, likely subject to approval of going to be developed. We have another 8 acres for which we had a development proposal that the planning board turned down, and it's now under appeal, so we don't know what's going to happen there. But basically, in a nutshell, all of the RMF land in town is already committed.
Although, one would hope that the zoning might encourage some redevelopment.
Yeah, there is that possibility.
That's probably where, like a lot of communities, when they're going to make some changes,
Yeah,
it's going to be redevelopment.
But again, that goes back to the challenge that a developer has a lot of hoops to jump through. The special permit and all the restrictions on density and height restrictions. We potentially could look at providing more flexibility in the existing RMF zone. As I said, we have some other zones that are open for multifamily development. In most cases, they already have projects either in the planning stages or prospective. So that's kind of where we're at. We don't really have, even though we just passed the MBTA zoning,
Yeah.
it largely builds on what's already allowed in town. So that didn't really add any
Right.
new zoning for multifamily.
But it's now by right.
It is by right, and that's, it covers the area, the 40Rs and the village mixed use, which allows multifamily by right already.
Right.
So we didn't touch the RMF zone for the MBTA. So the other zoning challenge I want to mention is two-family homes. Two-family homes, the housing production plan spends some time explaining the advantages from an affordability perspective of two-family homes.
Right.
Unfortunately, Grafton's zoning despises two-family homes. We don't allow two-family homes at all in the R40 and A zones.
Right.
That's
Right.
most of our residential zoning, some 60% of it. We don't allow two families at all in the medium density, R20. We reluctantly allow two families, but only by special permit.
Yeah.
Another big hoop to jump through. So basically, Town of Grafton zoning despises two families. And if I were to add one recommendation to this plan, I would recommend that we allow two-family zoning in a way that makes it practical for someone to actually come in and build one. We've had, in the last 10 years, we've had exactly two-family structures built. Two people who are willing to go through the planning board hoops and get that special permit. And in a zone where it's actually sort of allowed.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a big challenge, and that's one big thing that the plan misses.
Well, we included, we were talking about that missing middle.
Yes.
And trying to incorporate infill housing into existing neighborhoods. Two-family houses were, included. Maybe what we should do is just emphasize it more in
Yeah,
that
I
context.
would it would be my suggestion that the town consider allowing two families in all residential zones by right. Or maybe with site plan approval, but by right. I mean, you think of the 4,000 square foot homes that we're building nowadays, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 square foot homes we're building, they're selling like hotcakes.
Yeah.
You take that same exact housing envelope, the same footprint, you split it in half, you got, it looks the same.
Yes.
But you've got two families
Yes.
instead of one.
Yes.
What's wrong with that? Why do we hate it? I don't know.
No,
Enough.
no,
I could go on for a long time on that.
I love that, because I'm such a big fan of two-family owner-occupied housing, you know. Thank you.
You had a question for Dave.
That's okay, she has
I'd like to build on a couple of things that Dave said. So going back to one of his earliest statements about diversity in housing, it's got to get much more nuanced than single-family houses and apartments, because there's huge variety. My parents' first house was a Levitt house, Levitt development in Long Island. It was 1,000 square feet. You walked in, there was a kitchen, an eating kitchen, a living room, and 2 bedrooms and a bath, and an upstairs. And eventually, most people who bought these finished off. But when you first bought them, that's what you got. And a carport. Anyone ever hear of a carport? Or a garage? And that's what they built, of course, in the 50s and 60s for all the service people that came back. These are the infamous baby boomers. It's where we grew up. And that's a world of difference from what they're building today, which are the McMansions, for lack of a better word. I know it's somewhat overused, but look at the newer developments.
Well,
They
yeah,
don't look anything
Yeah.
like Levittown.
yeah. Once again, this kind of missing middle piece in the infill in existing neighborhoods, we suggest this kind of cluster of cottage-style or bungalow houses
Yeah.
that are typically 1,000 square feet or
Yeah, so to
less.
just say single-family homes doesn't begin to cover it. And I was going to say the same thing with apartments. Yes, I'm glad we're getting more apartments, but we're not building, 600, 800,000 square foot apartments. We're building 1,500, 2,000 square foot apartments, luxury, that start for a studio at about 2,000. That's not affordable. And to say, oh, we've got apartments, they're automatically affordable. Yeah, well, I guess compared to
Well,
buying
some
a
of them-
single-family home.
Some of them are more affordable, they're below market because
Right, but
the
again,
rents are.
it's more nuanced than just saying, oh, we've got more apartments, that's great. But if it's not including some of those affordable ones, then you might as well just build a few more mansions. And I love Dave's last thing about going into the multifamilies. How many of us knew people that grew up like that? And from a slightly different perspective on this, but I think part of what's happened is the nice thing about allowing multifamily housing is you have owners, that typically, if you build a two-family, chances are you're living on one side, you're renting out the other. Or in the old days, you built a 3-decker, you lived on one side, chances are relatives lived on the other 2 floors. But somebody owned it. When you
But
build
they
these
were
big
owner-occupied with a
apartment
rental
complexes-
unit.
Right.
Or two.
You've got a corporation owning all the housing units, not the individuals living in them. So if you've got 10 3-family houses, you've got 10 owners. Whereas if you've got a 30-unit apartment building, you've got 1 owner.
Yeah. No, I mean,
And I just think more
we really
owners
tried
is
to get at
better.
that issue of the missing middle, the difference between the single-family house and the apartment building, but different, housing types that can better address wider range of local needs. But maybe there's a way of trying to, emphasize it more.
Yeah. And another one that's kind of overlooked, and I know it's a very small percentage of the population, but whatever happened to rooming houses? How many of us have read, for example, the sequel to Little Women? When Jo goes off to live in the city and do whatever she does, where did she live? Did she find a nice apartment for herself? No, she rented a room in a rooming house. And all the other stories. Nellie Bly, how many of you have read the story of Nellie Bly? God, I'm dating myself, sorry guys. The same thing, she went off to the big city, and lived in a rooming house. And not the greatest example. You ever watch the Three Stooges, the old Three Stooges? They were always living in rooming houses and messing them up, but that's because they were too religious. But that needs, maybe that needs to become part of our ecosystem again.
I have a question about what you're talking about.
I'm sorry, what?
I had a question too about the people living in apartments in our
Yeah.
town.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of follow on with that.
Yeah.
Because it really does need to emphasize the diversity of housing
Right.
styles. It's not just two types of housing, or three
Right.
types. We really want to see a diversity. Just as a sort of a side note on the topic of duplexes, the majority of the two families in Grafton are owned the way that someone
Owner-occupied.
owns one side.
Yeah.
Some of them, I think maybe about 1/3 of them, I have a count, I don't remember it off the top of my head, about 1/3 of them are actually structured as condos. So
Yeah.
the two units
Yeah,
are each
you've got two
individually owned.
owners.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but that again, that speaks a little bit to the diversity of housing style. There's a diversity of ownership styles too.
That's right.
Yeah.
But, you can't emphasize enough the difference between affordability in the subsidized housing inventory sense, the 80% AMI, and the more general topic of affordability to a diverse population at different income levels.
Yeah.
So from your statement about the folks that are already living in town in houses that have been chopped up into apartments, which there's a ton, you're telling me we don't know the number of rental units in these homes. We have no idea. Because all my neighbors have they look like single-family homes. Go down Milbury Street, go down all those little, those look like single-family, but go at night when all the cars are parked, because there's 4 or 5 apartments in each one of those huge McMansions. They're not, these are homes that have just been, so how many are there? We don't know. Is that
No,
what you're saying?
I can't, the data that I get from the assessors, the assessors will assess a unit as a single family, as a 2-family, or a 3-family, or a multifamily, or a condo.
4 to 8, 8 to 12.
Right, and they've got two levels of multifamily. But you can't tell from that necessarily how many units are there. In some cases, I went through the larger count where the assessors data doesn't tell you how many units. In most cases, I can look at the building, and particularly for the large ones, you can kind of see how many units per building. Some of their data has that in there. But no, you can't tell whether a given unit is occupied by an owner or renter. The assessor doesn't have that information.
So we don't know then how many people are living in our town that maybe are renters that look like they're living in another lifestyle. Because to your point, we have Tufts, we have all these college students, and they're living all around us. And we've grown into that ability for people to come and live in Grafton and pay rent and live in one of these larger homes. So, I mean, we are doing this naturally. All my neighbors are renters, but I have a home here on Milbury Street.
Yeah.
So
You
I'm
might
just
be able to
saying
get
it's
property.
happening.
You might be able to go to property tax records and look up the address and find out the number of units. I imagine that maybe some of the units aren't legal. I mean, they haven't gone through the appropriate.
But it's happening. I mean, it's are doing this already. We're missing out on what's, go
But
and
they
walk the
might not be
neighborhood.
units. I lived in a house in West Concord, and there were 4 young women in that house. Now, 2 of them were the daughters of the original owners at the time I moved in. So, like you said, you would look at that and think, oh, a family lives there. Well, why are there always anywhere from 4 to 8 cars, depending on who had a boyfriend over? But it was still a single-family house. It wasn't broken up into units. We were housemates. And it turned out there were like 3 other houses right in that one neighborhood that were also young people in their 20s sharing the rent and being, quote, housemates without having, quote, illegal units. But we were renters. And at some point, even the 2 daughters moved out. and the mother still rented it out to whatever 4 people happen to get together and rent it out.
Something like that would not be assessed as a multifamily.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
How much affordable housing we have, we don't know,
Yeah.
because it's happening.
right.
Certainly on all the streets off the common.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all affordable housing
Yeah.
up there.
Well, but that's not
Well,
necessarily affordable.
Right,
housing.
having to live with 4 people you're not related to in order to be able to pay the
Oh,
rent.
but that's a
doesn't mean
good point,
it's-
then what, so
affordable.
if you earn $50,000 a year, what kind of house should you be able to buy? If you earn $50,000 a year, what kind of house am I gonna buy?
So
Like, it's
the
gonna be-
definition that's used for this stuff is 30% of your income. If you're paying 30% or less, that's considered affordable for you. If you're paying above 30%, that's considered not affordable for you, for your own income level.
So what kind of house would that be?
You
$50,000
can't.
house?
It's no kind of house, present, at $50,000 a year.
I think it was 269.
So then you'd be a renter. I'm just wondering, at what point are we saying,
So
What's
then
the
you'd be a renter,
income?
but still paying about $2,000 a month for rent, depending on whether or not you're getting a 1-bedroom or more. If you're getting a multi-bedroom, it's like $3,000 a month, right? So that is in excess of what you are able to afford. So then you're skimping off of other items that you might need, like medicine, or food, or the ability to keep up with any number of household bills or your own credit score.
That's right.
That's what the point is.
Yeah.
I think one of your earlier slides, one of the first few slides actually had that breakout, or illustrated that breaking point between rental costs and purchase costs.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly how much income you need to afford the median price house and also the rent. I mean, as I recall, for $1,500 rental, you have to have $70,000. So guess what? Lots of people are spending half their income on housing costs.
I mean, it's Massachusetts in general, this whole state is that way.
I mean, New York's like that too.
Yeah.
Connecticut, I live in Connecticut, it's like that. I mean, it's anywhere, and even in places that seem a lot more affordable, it's the rent to income balance. So if you have a community where the pricing price is saying, oh, wow, this is great, but then you look at the incomes and you go, they're still struggling.
Yeah, I just say from a perspective of this particular exercise for this particular document, we're not going to go back to the state and kind of change their rule set and sandbox that we're happen to be in now. So from our perspective, to get any value out of this as an actual working document, we're going to have to go by what the guidelines are set for us. So the guidelines say 80%. The guidelines set these things for the 40B process, which is what developers are going to use. Because at the end of the day, if we want to do things like talk about changing R40 and R20, if we're going to do that in the context of this plan, we have to look beyond zoning a little bit. Because you have other things that are affecting those particular neighborhoods. 40% of the town is not on a sewer system or a water system.
That's right.
Okay, so if you're going to our large areas of R40 and stuff like that, you're going to have to also ease the restrictions on septic design and systems, which are very cost prohibitive for a lot of people.
Right.
So let's say you live on Potter Hill Road and it's a big clay-topped hill. So pretty much every time you sell your house, you're going to put in a new septic system.
Right, right.
Now, for me to go in my particular property from, a design that was set for 5 bedrooms to go to 10 bedrooms, which is what I'd have to do if I was going to do 2, I probably could not afford that particular septic design under our current standards, which are way beyond what you actually need. Seeing that I have on the farmhouse next door, which has been around for 300 years on a cesspool, and the cesspool still functions, and my septic has 1 leach field, and 2 of the pipes don't work anymore, yet I can still use the cesspool. But I have to do what the town tells me to do in that regard. That's not in our bylaw. So, the planning board would be great, and if we're going to put that in this particular document and start looking at it, we have to look at all the things around it that need to change and not just the thing that.
Yeah, great point. I
Tommy.
really meant to mention that there was, great interest in trying to focus, guide new development areas that are served by water and sewer, that have the infrastructure there, too, because
And I would say most of your data that you're using for this is driven by census material.
A lot of it is. Not all of
And
it.
if you can't trust the census material to provide you with a good benchmark of where the town actually sits as far as affordability is concerned, you're really not starting from any
Oh,
position.
on affordability, though, there are multiple sources
You
on
may have
affordability.
Places where people are encouraged to, do some of the things that Irene were talking about, you basically rent a place for 2,000 and it's split between 4 tough students, so they can spread that 2,000 amongst, that happens all the time in town. There's a lot of single-family homes that are for rent. There's a lot of places that do that. But by and large, like what Dave said, your primary growth in town has been what you're seeing on Institute Road, which is basically very large places that gobble up a ton of lands, that if you encouraged a little bit more density there, you would get density. Because 90% of all the stuff we're talking about, we can say it and do it, and it's great, but it's the developers that are actually developing these projects. And if the developers want to come in and make money, they're going to style the development based on how they're going to make the most money out of it.
Right.
And so there's a weird position in between, like what we're doing here and what's going to actually sell.
I feel like
And
that's
it's
one of
hard
the...
to bridge that gap because you don't really know, and when you're paying 8 or 9% in interest payments now to raise $20 million, it really jeopardizes how this all works as far as us taking something and giving it to somebody else. So 25 Worcester Street is what we're talking about here. We're getting a great package. So you're going to get some 30% AMI. It's all senior housing. It looks great on paper, but that company really only has 2 funding sources in the entire state that's actually going to give them a loan to do that. So they're structuring it based on getting those subsidized loans. And if they don't get them, the project just doesn't happen.
Well, chances are they might have to go through a couple of funding rounds because the funds are so competitive.
Which pushes the thing out to 2026, and then we're talking about development that takes 6 years to do.
I know, it's very frustrating. Potentially, these new resources that are coming through the housing bond bill and what was passed through Housing Works at $97 million might add some, additional resources to cover more projects instead of people having to wait in queue until their project pops up out of triage.
If you're on a board or something, could you tell me, like I serve on something, so I know who's talking from professional, whatever, and then who, because I don't really know. Like, are you on one of the planning boards, or is there?
Sure. I'm actually on that Board of Housing.
Okay, thanks. That's good.
I want to,
He's on the plan.
if you don't know me, I'm Dave Robinson. I'm on the planning board among other things. But to follow up a little bit on one of Bruce's point, that we can talk about what we would like to see. One of the things I always have to remind myself is we cannot create more land, but we can change the rules and incentives for how our land is developed.
That's right.
And some of what I referred to earlier as the zoning challenges are disincentives today for building multifamily homes, strong disincentives for building 2-family.
Right.
There's other disincentives for really our zoning, and this is, we changed our zoning about 40 years ago to make this happen. We incentivize the development of large single-family homes and disincentivize everything else.
That's right.
We can change the incentives. We can adjust incentives. We can try to provide incentives for developers to make it easier or more attractive for developers to build the kind of housing we would like to see.
Right.
So that's all we can do.
Well, you can provide subsidies too. I mean, there's other things that you can do with the subsidies, other incentives besides zoning. But zoning is pretty critical.
And I'm thinking more broadly the topic of incentives.
Yeah.
That we can offer up some incentives for the kind of development we want. That doesn't mean it's going to happen.
That's right.
We can do the best we
That's
can
right.
to try to facilitate it. But ultimately, it's up to the developers. Bruce was talking about. They've got to some money.
If we go back to your point where we're going to allow a two-family home to be built, I don't need a developer to do that. I need a person who wants to build a house who says, ooh, if I can make that a two-family and rent out the other half, or hey, my best friend wants to go in on it with me, now that $225,000 piece of land is much more affordable to me. Than if you're telling me, oh, now that you paid $225,000 for the land, the only thing we'll let you put on it is a house, a single house.
Right.
Yeah,
You know, so not even just developers, but
well,
owners.
yeah. Commonly, we think of developer as a large-scale
Right.
developer, but I really, that may not be the best term to use for what I'm thinking of it, because in it, it's more generally somebody, if we have sufficient incentives, somebody, whether large or small, may be attracted to do what,
Right.
the kind of things we're talking about. It's a good point, though. We tend to think of developers as these big corporations
Right.
that build large projects. And that's not the only kind. You know, we have builders who build one house at a time. You know, and the incentives apply the same way whether large or small.
Fiona has a good idea, maybe people might want to, suggest certain incentives that we can include or add to the plan that,
There's a list that are already in there, but if we wanted to talk more about what was listed or, anything that people feel particularly strongly about, we're using.
So, I'm Dan Cushman, the Affordable Housing Trust. I think the accessory dwelling units would be a game changer for everything that's been said recently. It would be people who already own a home, a single-family home, largely people who already own a single-family home and want to add on a smaller rental unit on their property. So it's not, some big corporation trying to make a profit off of homes for people. And it would be, scattered around town. It wouldn't be in any particular area. And it would be those starter and downsize level units that we desperately need more of. So I think that would be a huge, way to incentivize building those types of homes.
I'm for 10% of the land undeveloped.
what?
10%, like when a developer comes in, they have to leave like a percentage of the land undeveloped, so there's not slash and burn, like we're not tearing everything. I don't think we have a tree ordinance in this town, I've looked, I haven't seen it, but a lot of cities have that, and they protected the look of and the environment, and we are going into an environmental disaster and everything, so we just should be thinking, they can't come in and just tear everything down, every tree, and then put up apartments. There needs to be some incentive for us to have the environment that we moved here, like I moved here during COVID. My house was worth more, not anymore, because the housing prices are going down. But I moved here because we have a lot of things in the neighborhood that make it a great place to live. It's a community, and I heard this, every meeting we've been at, people are like, we want our community. They say open space, but they do mean we want our trees, and we want to have a cool environment to live in, 10 degrees hotter from all these apartments that are being built, just slash and burn. So that's what I'm thinking, like when Bruce said they can come in and do whatever they want, I understand what he's saying, but if we had some limits on what they could do to protect the environment too, that would be awesome.
That's a point for it, because we do in fact have that, particularly, you mentioned the flexible development bylaw, which has a requirement for, I don't remember exactly, a substantial amount of the space. That's for subdivisions, but a substantial amount of space is required to be left open. Yeah. That's another, there's that and some related topics regarding subdivisions. I think we could strengthen that and make it, and maybe even make it mandatory. Over the last 30 or so years since we created the flexible development back in the early 90s, and over half of the subdivisions since then that have been created as flexible developments, reserving a lot of open space. I think it's worth looking at strengthening that, maybe making it a requirement instead of optional. Similarly with multifamily, large-size multifamily developments, there's a substantial requirement for open space there. Again, we could look at strengthening that because, yeah, we don't want to chew up all the land, which is basically what we've been doing, even with the open space requirements on the flex. Still, those developments are chewing up an awful lot of land, but they're not providing, relative to the land area that they're chewing up, they're not providing that much housing.
And
Dave.
say open
Bruce, do you wanna
space, it
add
doesn't
something?
include trees.
Yeah, just from perspective of the actual housing production plan. So the town has, the charter sets up, you know, how we take a look at the charter. The charter sets up how we take a look at general bylaws, how they come under a comprehensive review. When you look at zoning regulations and housing production plan, we actually do the housing production plan every 5 years, and it's a substantive document, and it actually provides most of the information you need to do to make the right decisions with your bylaw and your charter. Yet, there's no real requirement outside of the two boards committees to actually sign off on it, and then use it as an actual document.
Right.
So when we say and we suggest in the housing production plan that we want to make these amendments, we don't provide much of like an executable plan to actually accomplish that. Now, Dave and I,
Models, but
yeah.
we don't say you have to do X, Y, and Z, because that's part of the deliberations.
I guess that's where it falls down for me, because I love going through this process. It brings a lot of things to light, and it brings some new people to the audience too, which is great. But you got to take this and actually put it into something that's actually usable. So if the town were to say, yes, we need to revisit zoning regulations on a 5-year basis, because we really do, because that's how quickly the market will change and how you can stay on top of these type of things.
Yeah.
But we
the
don't.
flexible development bylaw, for example, where we say you need to increase the density of bonuses, and you need to increase the requirements for affordable housing. You need to extend applicability to other housing types besides single family. So there's some guidance, but the specifics really need to come out of planning board deliberations.
Well, and that's fine, but
Yeah.
that should be mandatory, is I guess what I'm saying. It's mandatory for us to do this. It's mandatory for us to go through the general bylaw. We just spent a year,
I see.
well, I think Dave spent
Yeah.
like a good couple years in that actual process. We went to town meeting, we went through a fairly extensive, long town meeting just a few weeks ago, and we passed all these things, and they were everything from typos to, non-criminal disposition and things like that, really big, bold things. And we did some planning stuff and some zoning stuff, because the MBTA, but if the MBTA stuff wasn't there, I'm not sure how much time we'd actually spend on what we were trying to accomplish. And then the last time before that, we did something really big, was the overlay districts, which worked
Yeah.
really well.
Yeah.
So if the town actually wanted to use this as a document, that it was, like every 3 to 5 years, we should have a standing committee that forces the planning board, the ZBA, and all the other, affiliated parties to draw up something and report it back to the town meeting
Yeah.
and say, these are the things that we suggest we do.
Some
And then you go
greater
back in
teeth-
the spring and you vote on it.
Teeth in the recommendations.
Yeah, just a question. Dave, you had sent me this statistic not too long ago. What percentage of total Grafton area land mass is presently in conservation? Is it something like 20%?
I believe it's 17% of the land area is permanently protected
Okay.
in one way or another as conservation land or similar forms of perpetual protection.
Okay, so a point I want to make to just the environmentalists in the room, I hear you. The problem with the previous suggestion is there's something I think people miss a lot. Denser housing is environmental, okay? So you take 60 units on 1 acre, it's much more environmentally friendly than 60 units over 60 acres in compliance with our minimum 1 acre lot, single family zoning, which by the way, tears up trees, and when you have these nice pretty neighborhoods, there aren't many trees on the front lawn, right? Because they tore down all the trees so they could have a nice grass lawn, and that's not being replaced. So what you're looking for is something that meets with the Conservation Committee, which meets with the Planning Board requirements, which meets with the Zoning Board of Appeals requirements, which are onerous, by the way, All that to get something built that is in fact more environmentally friendly than what we have already going on. So something like 25 Worcester Street, I would say, okay, well, stands to reason 10% of the land mass isn't going to be built on. That's probably going to be the case. But I would sooner stick more units in that 10% of land mass to save that other 10 acres of land that is going to be otherwise disrupted if we continue with our present zoning patterns.
Just to dovetail on the environmental aspect of it too, the town has, I think, done a very good job of staying up to date on stormwater management, conservation, protocols, even the Board of Health, which I don't particularly care for how they make you set up septic design, but I think from that perspective and conservation, the town has done a great job. So stormwater management alone is, it is very helpful, especially when it comes to, maintaining wetlands and the discharge for all these developments.
I hear you, but I have lived in the fastest two growth places in the country, and these same arguments came up, and when they rezoned things multi-use, what happened was the developers came in and really they just put in strip malls, tore everything down. They didn't build those cute little apartments on top like they showed in those pictures the other night. So it's a little, I'm just suggesting that there's a way to think about this where we're not doing that type of development where we have a strip mall and apartments that don't have any barrier protections. And in Tallahassee, Florida, they have 10%. You can build anything as long as there's 10% undeveloped. And just that one little strip of trees keeps a lot of runoff from going into our sewers and polluting our environment. It's a thought, I'm just thinking about if we're gonna grow, like everyone says we're gonna grow, let's just think about what kind of place we wanna live in.
Yeah, that's
Not become Worcester, which is great.
Okay,
Yeah.
question with regards to lot sizes, we're talking about 1 acre, you say 1 acre?
Minimum, yeah.
Okay, lot sizes, why is that necessary? Why can't that be looked at in terms of zoning where you can have quarter-acre lot sizes? I mean, I actually own a piece of property that has 2 quarter acres that we put together because the town changed the zoning to half-acre minimum. This is in South Grafton, and I assume there's a lot of other people like me that have that situation where they had 2 lots, now they have 1 lot, and they can't do anything with the other lot. It would be something to look at, especially where there's already, multifamily housing, in the area. So it might be worth looking at something like that where
Well,
size of lots.
one of the recommendations on this kind of is to really look at the use restrictions and dimensions in the zoning and try, revisit some of those with, respect to some of these different housing types too.
I mean, this is the way this town grew up. I mean, it was a factory town.
Yeah.
You built, a house, you built a house next to it.
Yeah.
There wasn't any real regards for, you gotta have an acre
Right.
to build on, So.
There are some, I don't know what the history is for how it got this way, but there are some neighborhoods in town where there are 1/10 acre lots, on a little street or a couple streets
Right.
together, and it works. I don't know why we couldn't build, a new development of that somewhere.
I mean, there's certain areas where you've got, like I say, South Grafton, a lot of dense housing in there. Where you have probably some lots and so forth that aren't legal, but could be built upon if the zoning was changed so that would allow for it.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two areas that come up. The mill villages generally, where the old mill housing, which is a substantial part of South Grafton,
Right.
North Grafton, New England Village area. And then there are the areas that were built, you mentioned this area, the post-World War II, the housing. You look in Grafton, and there's an area, particularly across the street from Wyman Gordon, there are several subdivisions there that were built in the late 40s and into the 50s with that same style, the small lots, quarter acre, 10,000 square feet, 8,000 square feet. So there is that. That happened in Grafton. People live there that seem to be perfectly comfortable living there. Don't talk too much about Wyman Gordon. It's a whole other. But like I said before, around 40 years ago, we changed our zoning. We decided we didn't want any more of that. We decided that from that point forward, from mid-80s or on,
Yeah.
that we were all about large lots. And that's how we got to where we are now. You know, and much of our open space has been chewed up with large homes on large lots, because that's what we decided 40 years ago we wanted. Maybe we didn't, I wasn't around. I came here just in time to vote for that without really thinking about what I was voting on, but the thought that went into that, I don't know.
That was a trend.
That was,
It wasn't just in Grafton, it was across the state, there was a whole thing about all of a sudden kind of looking at upzoning, and,
Yep.
We're talking about 34 acres that they talked about earlier that's developable, that's open, available for development. How much would be open with existing land that isn't necessarily categorized as developable right now, where people have, like I do, it could be 2 lots, on the property, or more in some cases, I'm sure, where they could build, more dense housing.
well, one of the recommendations is to look at those non-conforming lots and to make changes so that they can be developed. I
Right.
mean, that's one of the recommendations.
I think, I want to follow up a little bit on, I think it was Bruce's point. It's a pet peeve of mine that we make these plans,
Yeah,
we don't have a mechanism to get results from the plans. I mean, this plan here satisfies the state requirement, and just writing it, getting it approved, putting it on the shelf, accomplishes something with respect to chapter 40B.
yeah, that's
But when we recommend, and I say this is a pet peeve because
yeah, you're on the planning board, so
I'm on the planning board, I'm chairing the master plan working group.
there you go.
There's another plan that,
Hopefully, that'll be help reinforcing the master planning process.
and building on my experience with the recently completed open space and rec plan, where
Okay.
we had 65 action items.
Oh,
When we put that together, we gave no thought to
oh,
how we were going to actually make any of that happen. So we put together a committee to basically oversee the implementation of that plan. We assigned each action item to some board or committee or department that's going to be responsible for that. And we have no way of forcing them to do anything, but we're asking, at the very least, we ask them every year, these are your work items, what have you done? And there's only so much you can actually do to make something happen. But I'm thinking the same way with the master plan, that I would like us to come up with a relatively modest set of action items, but know who's going to do them, and make sure that they're willing to. Yes, I agree that I should do it. The planning board's going to have some action items come at it. So we need a
yeah,
commitment.
there needs to
from
be
everybody.
accountability. That's
A commitment to actually make these things happen. That's the hard part of following up on a plan.
Yeah, well, there's no substitute for leadership in getting things done, right?
Yeah.
There you go, Dave. You should follow the orders.
Did
There's gonna be something else.
you have a question or?
Yeah, sort of, the state is kind of changing how all our towns are going to be looking. I wanted to create all this housing, and it's, it's definitely going to change the Grafton I knew, because I grew up here. My parents grew up here. How is the state going to reimburse us for,
They're going to be giving a lot of resources
They
to
do.
help. I mean, the idea too is if you increase the housing supply, the prices should at some point go down. So that's one thing. But I think the whole idea is to direct growth to appropriate locations with, appropriate requirements and provisions to, that benefit the community. And that's not like the easiest thing to do, but that's the challenge.
yeah, because I know it's like they want to put it in some weird locations in the town already.
What's weird?
Well, there's one place, on Pleasant Street, I don't think that location is appropriate.
Oh, agreed.
Yeah.
I know.
But, I know other people might think differently, but it's a small street, no sidewalks,
Yeah. The state's identified it? No.
No, it's land that came up for sale, it's been for sale for a decade.
Oh, it's for.
It's right across the street from all the other developments, right next to 40B.
It's a wonderful
wildlife area. It's a really shame they're gonna build on it.
So this is what we run into when we kind of have that little appropriate loophole is there seems to be some reason that every parcel of land is inappropriate to build new housing.
Got it.
So, that one is actually, like the developer is giving, there's a bunch of land that's not developable on that lot. It's actually a pretty good deal for the town, given that that is gonna be granted back to us once they're done with the development. The developer is doing a lot of work to, improve the traffic safety in that area, build sidewalks for a portion of that area, but it happens to be next to some of the neighborhoods that have nice, large houses on large lots, and people are concerned about having apartments close by there. So that word appropriate, it's loaded.
Got it.
I will say though, part of this exercise and getting into safe harbor and being at 10% is fundamentally how you control and you self-rule. So if we were at our 10% threshold, if we provided the density to have developers come in and do things like Prentice Place and 25 Worcester Street, et cetera, the town would be at its threshold and you wouldn't even have to hear those proposals. So all of the current proposals, whether you like where they are or not, we cannot dictate that those can go there. They go through a LIP process, they go through a process by which they go to our ZBA, but at the end of the day, if you're not in safe harbor, they have an outlet, and the state really can dictate where it can go, how it can go, and you have to play by that rule set. The only way you don't is you get a housing production plan with a good set of goals that the DACD or whatever they're calling themselves now approves of, and then you can set those benchmarks for the town and actually accomplish them. You get into safe harbor, and then you can tell somebody who's coming into a neighborhood that you don't particularly want it to be there, then no, you can't put it there. But you have to provide them another outlet to put that density there so you can actually start participating in correcting the problem.
Right.
I find 39 units every year to be very high,
So I think
Is that unattainable?
I think with your question about how it would change the town,
Yeah.
I think we need to consider that the people who would live in those homes are already here. They're living in their parents' basements. They're seniors who can't downsize without leaving the community. They're people who are living in nearby communities, maybe people living in motels because they can't find an apartment to live in. And it would change the way that our town looks a little bit to have more houses in some places. But I think it would also change our town in allowing a lot more people to live more fulfilling lives in better conditions. And I think that's worth the change in how things look in certain parts of town.
One other point I want to make about the town changing. I mean, I didn't grow up here, and I appreciate that you did, but you seem to be around my age, and you have to recognize that the town that you grew up in the 80s and 70s, that town's gone already. The majority of the housing that's been built in Grafton or will be built in Grafton was built between 1965 and I'd say 2000 or so. Those 25 years. We increased the population of Grafton double over the course of that 2.5 decades. Over the course of the past decade, we've built practically nothing. That's why. It's true. You might not think so, but in Karen's summary, the statistics are there, and the statistics are also at DACD about how little we've built. In fact, we built, I think, no two-family homes over the course of, the past 10 years. So already the town has changed. What we're trying to do here with this is to peel off what little portions of town that are developable that can have an impact for people who cannot afford to live here or cannot afford to stay here. Those are always our cops, our teachers, our firefighters, and our seniors. And what's our elderly population doubled in poverty over the course of the past decade?
More than.
More than. And that's what we're talking about. Not talking about wholesale changes to the town. We're talking about picking spots like 59 Pleasant Street, across the street from where I live and where Mark lives, where the units were selling for $200,000 when they were built in 1997. Now they're selling for $750,000. Why? Because the house is 3 times better than it was before? No. It's because we haven't built anything. And they're because more people need to live here, because we just have more people. And that's across Massachusetts, but it's becoming acute in the Worcester area.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's across Massachusetts, but the housing prices are still high in areas that are really dense too. So it's just, I mean, it's an income problem, you know, we don't just get paid enough money here either, so it's both. But I think we just have to be a little respectful for the people that really have, I didn't grow up here either, but I want to be respectful of you all that have, and I know change is really hard. And,
Yeah.
you know, together though, as a community, we can come together and hopefully work on some of these issues that are, you know, strongly felt by some folks, and just be understanding of one another.
I think that we're being understanding, but I also want to be respectful of the people that are sleeping in their cars. I want to be respectful that need to get up, people need to get out of abusive relationships. I want to be respectful of people that need to change jobs. I want to be respectful of people that need to save for college. And I know, so this is a balancing act, but that's why we're having these community forums and we're suggesting reasonable places to put development in a reasonable way. And there's a lot of process here. 59 Pleasant Street has gone through how many meetings? What? A lot of meetings. A lot of meetings, right? So.
And that one stands out because it's one of the last places left. We moved here in 1994, 30 years ago. Okay, so yeah, the town has changed even in the 30 years that we've been here. When we first moved here, there were fields on both sides of the road with cows. No more cows. And 59's the only one, you know, left that's not developed. Okay, there's a whole section of houses right before that. There's like 4 or 5 of the big, you know, 1 acre lots with houses. They weren't there when we moved here. Across from where we lived, there's a whole new development, a little cul-de-sac with another 6 or so houses on 1 acre lots. A little bit further up the road, the same thing, another new cul-de-sac with about 10 or 12 homes on their 1 acre lots. All in the 30 years that we've been here. That land stands out because it's the last one standing.
It's
But I also know behind St. James Church, I mean, they just totally cleared all the trees away and everything. I mean, that's horrible.
Oh, you got an institute?
No, St. James Church,
St. James,
Main
yeah.
Street, South Grafton. That's a disaster. Institute Road doesn't look so
The
great.
thing about 59 Pleasant Street is it abuts wildlife preserve.
Yeah.
And it is the field, it's part of wetlands, a pond,
And that's the
woods,
part that's been
and it's the
donated.
field.
Yeah, none of that's being touched. Like the wetlands, all that stuff in the back, none of that's
Well, a
being
little
touched.
bit of it,
I don't know if it's.
but it's still part of that ecosystem, that's the field part. That's why it's
So I think this highlights why it's so important to do this work and do this planning and strategy work, because if we had local control back from 40B, if we were in safe harbor, if we had that full 10%, then we would be able to turn down something like 59 Pleasant Street. And if we wanted to put something like that at 59 Pleasant Street, we could zone for it, but then it would have to go through town meeting, and every registered voter in town would have the chance to go vote on it at town meeting. And so doing it, getting local control back and doing things through the zoning process of changing our zoning bylaws, changing what different places are zoned, that gives the actual voters in town the control to decide these things. And then we can put those developments in places that the voters think are the best places, and not necessarily where a developer decided to buy up some land.
And you know, if you got safe harbor, you could still use 40B, but it's the friendly 40B process, so that the developer in the town would have to agree on the terms and conditions of particular developments. So it's a very different kind of orientation.
Right.
I don't want to continue to hop on 59 Pleasant Street, but
But I'm going
I'm going to. As we discussed earlier in the presentation, one of the more impactful things that we can do is reduce reducing that AMI number beyond the 80% average median income minimum. And 59 Pleasant Street does that. It has units at 50 and 60%, you know, in the affordable unit
Yeah, that's where,
structures.
that's where, you know, documented greater need in those people in households, yeah.
Even
Yeah, because
debating
there's a
the
lot of
location.
focus on our teachers, but the schools also have paraprofessionals who earn half of what a teacher does. It has custodians, it has cafeteria workers.
That's right.
It's not just teachers.
That's right.
I think I have my hand the longest.
Oh, I'm
Thank you for
sorry.
calling me finally. I just have a question on one of your slides relative to, so in this housing production plan that you're creating, you indicated continued focus on rental housing and then like a number of subsets, and then first-time home ownership is the second priority, which included like the starter housing and units for empty nesting.
Yeah.
So I just wanted you to maybe just clarify that a little bit, because what I hear, and actually what I kind of am living, is professional, upper 20s, lower 30-year-old kids, elderly parents, myself nearing retirement, not looking for these rentals necessarily, but looking for that middle level that we actually don't have. You know, we have a lot of potential rentals coming in, whether or not they all come to fruition, I'm not sure. But I just wondered, like, it seemed that it was like, priority was continue focus on that rental, and then that is like a second priority was kind of what we're talking about right now almost. So I just don't know how that looks in your document.
The suggestion is that, that about 85% of the units be rental, compared to 15% of home ownership. Typically, if you're going to do home ownership, there really aren't any state subsidies to make,
Right.
to do it. So if the land costs are this, we're talking about the affordability gaps, so you've got to come up with subsidies
Right.
to get it down to certain income levels. So for a single unit, that ends up being a lot of money on an incremental basis. So typically, home ownership is smaller in scale when it includes affordable units, and or you have, you know, a significant number of market units that are supporting a small
Yeah.
number of
Which
affordable
is what
ones.
we're doing
It's
now.
just, you know, on a pragmatic basis, it's just harder to get to scale on home ownership as opposed to rentals. And home ownership doesn't get to the folks that are really, whose incomes are at or below 60% of AMI. So that's a whole other, and then you look at the wait list for subsidized housing in this town.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's
Well,
just
you
so
just-
much pent up need.
You know, a three-bedroom at Prentice is what, $3,500, so that's crazy, you know, more than my, obviously my mortgage and my taxes, and very working kids, that wouldn't make sense, right? The reason my daughter's living with me right now as a teacher, who's actually making a decent salary at Worcester Public Schools, is because why pay $2,000 to $3,000, right, for a rental right now, when in fact that's what I'm paying for my mortgage, and, you know, in fact, she's just gonna try to save up. So if there was this, you know, Bob and I moved here, we didn't buy in Westboro because we couldn't afford that. We came here, started home for X amount, and that's like the little area that's not available. But I guess what you're saying is that there's no subsidies for this, and so therefore.
No, it
maybe
becomes
families are the-
harder to get to any kind of real scale given the amount of subsidy. However, the plan does suggest, you know, once again, as part of the scattered site missing middle piece,
Yeah.
that there be some consideration for these small clusters of cottage or bungalow units,
Yeah,
which are great for starter housing,
of course.
and which are great for downsizing, and they effectively can be for ownership or rental. I mean,
Sure.
they've been done for both.
But
but
it's gotta
they-
be a secondary priority because it's just not subsidies there for that.
It's just, yeah, it's
Yeah.
harder to finance these deals. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
Well, and those,
Okay, thank you.
and those subsidies, they're for like big developers, like for-profit developers to build, you know, it's not for like an individual who's going to build something. And I think part of the problem is that these things seem to be focused on for-profit developers and making it easier for them to do something. And then we just wait for them to decide to do it.
But there are also mission-driven regional nonprofit developers who have a lot of expertise. And, you know, if property became available and there were some subsidies, they would probably be very interested in responding. I
Not
mean,
in Grafton.
Huh?
It doesn't happen in Grafton. In Grafton, it's been the for-profit developers, and
No, I think that's the case, but maybe there are, like Habitat for Humanity, for example, you know, doing a small subdivision. They're getting often beyond just a single house at a time. So there might be opportunities to engage an entity like that to do something if property could be found and settled.
right. I guess I'm just expressing frustration with
I
the
understand.
state laws that we've been given to work with.
Yeah.
And the fact is, these for-profit developers make a lot of campaign donations, and it's hard to fight that when they're the people who are helping get our state leaders reelected. So,
Yeah, I got it.
Where is the demand coming from?
What?
Where is the demand for housing coming from?
Well, there is we've talked about the new residents that are coming in are from places closer to Boston or further south where, hey, they're not being able to find anything in Concord or Lexington or Western they can afford, but if they go a little further, they can, maybe Grafton starts looking pretty good to them. And so that's one place where demand is. And certainly, you know, people in town looking for ways to kind of move up or to find additional. COVID was another real quick push on demand side where people started kind of, that seemed to increase demand and push up prices.
Mark, the other thing is statewide. We've
Why is
created,
that? Because they want to leave cities?
Yeah, they were looking for, yeah, and they were more focused on a home because they were spending so much more time.
It's pretty
there.
impressive though, because the development in Boston is off the charts.
no, it's not. Absolutely not.
So I worked there in the 90s and I work there now.
Yeah.
I don't recognize the seaport.
Okay, well,
It looks like another city.
Yeah, that's because it's a lot of commercial development, it's a lot of high-end
High-end
residential development, Mark, but according to residents,
Work near all the apartments.
okay, well, according to the people who live there, they're saying it's impossible to get anything past the BPA. Okay, so they're really not pulling their weight. Nobody in the state's pulling their weight. We've created millions of jobs over the course of the past 20 years and hundreds of thousands of units. That's it. We have an 800,000 unit shortfall in Massachusetts right now. And it's because of conversations like this, time after time after time again, time after time after time.
There are more developments in Boston.
There are more people in Boston. There are more people in Boston, but as you're seeing, people work in Worcester. People want to move to Worcester. She just moved here. She's been here all of her life. I moved here. You moved here. And it's for the same reasons. Because there's good schools and there's jobs around here. But there's just more people. We've created all these jobs, but only a few $100,000 units. Okay.
There's more people. Where are they coming from?
Other people.
Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's how the population is.
Well, a lot of it is also because people are shifting from COVID with their work from home positions.
Right.
So they're like, okay, I can find some city that is affordable to me with my salary.
Right.
Versus Boston, yeah, you can make $100,000, $200,000, but you can't, in a seaport, an apartment is like, a one bedroom is like $5,500,
Right.
as an example.
Everything's relative.
Everything is just relatively
Yeah.
expensive. Like, I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but can't afford anything here,
That's
so
Right.
move out west.
And if you can work from home, buy a house out in the suburbs and
Yeah.
live out there.
Eventually, maybe not in our lifetimes, but eventually, Grafton's going to receive a lot of climate change refugees.
Yep.
People who,
Yep.
they lose their place along the coast. Sea level rise, it's going to drive people inland. We're inland. But that's a few years away.
Yeah, we're getting close to 9 o'clock. We'll just kind of finish any questions that are left or comments.
So I just want to say, I'm also new to town, 10 years, and we moved, I grew up in Westboro, and like Anne Marie, we also couldn't afford Westboro, so came to Grafton. I think that's where a lot of the people are coming from, is people who grew up in this area, whether it's Grafton or a nearby town, and they want to stay in the area. You know, I have family around here, I want to stay around here.
Yeah.
And, you know, population just increases over time. And I think that's where a lot of people are coming from. And also, a lot of people are coming to Grafton from these, not just the cities, you know, like Boston, but the towns close to the east where prices are a little bit higher and are getting to the point where I can't afford to buy the home that my parents raised me in.
Right.
So,
Right.
To add on to that, just food for thought, there's an MBTA stop in Grafton, so a lot of people are commuting back and forth that way.
And that's really what the price
That's
of
a
the
good
house,
point.
house prices, in my opinion, starts really changing.
Yeah.
Bruce?
I know we want to wrap up the
Yeah.
housing production plan, but just for this particular document and, you know, all the writing that Fiona's been up there scribbling away at,
Yikes. I know.
yeah, we have till the end of the year to do this. We have to the 21st to put it in front of
Yeah.
the planning board and the select board for an actual vote before we can even send it on its way. So we don't have the opportunity to do another one of these meetings. If we could
Yeah.
summarize, if there's any substantive changes that we want to make to the document, can we do that in the next 15 minutes?
Well, I think it's going to take a bit to digest all of this. And
Yeah, let's
you
get
know,
what
I
it
think-
is.
I think it's, what I'm hearing is kind of points of emphasis, things that we should stress a little bit more.
Well, you get some great big ideas in there that might not fit the time frame that we have to get it through to the.
Yeah, I think we have to be somewhat judicious in what we can accomplish, and but I think that there are ways of adding points of emphasis to address some of the issues that were raised tonight. And I think,
From a trust perspective, I don't want this to go before the planning board and the select board before the trust has another look at it.
well, what we'll do is, whatever changes are made, I'll go through these notes with Fiona. And whatever changes we'll highlight in red font, so it'll be easily accessible. Based on, I think a lot of the comments and issues that were raised are in the plan. So it's not like we need to do a whole new strategy. I think that they're embedded in the plan, but what I'm hearing is that some things should be called out a little bit more strongly.
Okay.
All right? Hey, thank you all for coming. Really, really appreciate